Recording. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Cookbowl Berkeley class, Spring Vegetables. Today we're making two entree recipes. One of them is creamy white beans with asparagus and peas. A really quick weeknight dinner that you can throw together and eat with some crusty bread. And then we're also making a deconstructed spring roll salad. Ah, thank you.
I think you're good to go. It's just that's different. That's like its own party.
Oh, it was a chat came up saying, can everyone hear?
Oh yeah, that was me.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, just checking.
So
Thanks
sorry.
for checking. All right. So we're gonna switch the view here. And we are going to start with the deconstructed spring roll salad. If the noise from the pool gets too distracting, let me know and I'll close the door. But I'm gonna be cooking on the stove a bit. So I want to make sure that we have proper ventilation in here. Okay, so the deconstructed spring roll salad is similar to a spring roll recipe that we actually have linked on our website. It's adapted from a website called the Viet Vegan. And we had a deconstructed spring roll salad on there years ago, but I think this is an updated and better, or at least different version. So I hope you like it. And we're making this because spring rolls are delicious and they're not too hard to make, but this is even easier where you don't have to wrap it up. And it's better for if you want to make it ahead, because spring rolls are really best fresh. If you make them ahead, you have to store them so that they don't stick together and they get kind of dried out after a day or so. So this way you can actually just prepare everything separately and throw in the dressing right before you eat it, and the peanuts for a little crunch, and you still get kind of all the flavor of the spring roll. For this recipe, we're going to use tofu as our protein, and it's really affordable, easy, plant-based. So I went ahead and cut it up and have been marinating it for a couple of hours. But really, as long as you marinate it 20-30 minutes or so, it'll turn out pretty well. But of course, the longer you marinate it, the more flavor it's going to have. And I'm going to cook it, tofu is kind of sticky, so I'm going to cook it on a nonstick skillet just to make sure it doesn't stick too much. And the recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of olive oil divided. So 1 tablespoon is in the marinade and then 1 tablespoon is going in the pan to cook it in to get it nice and crisp and prevent it from sticking. So the marinade is just soy sauce, garlic powder, and olive oil. So there's a 1/4 cup of soy sauce, or you can use tamari, which is very similar, but it's made without wheat. So if people have a wheat allergy or gluten sensitivity or celiac disease, then they're fine to eat tamari, but still just check the labels to be sure. Then a tablespoon of olive oil in the marinade and 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder. So just to save time, I went ahead and made that already. And this is extra firm tofu, which is nice because the more firm it is, basically the more concentrated everything is, the less water it is. So it's a little easier to cook. You don't have to press it as long. But I do recommend pressing it to make sure that there's enough space for it to absorb the marinade. There's not really any standard definition of firm, extra firm, or any other density for tofu. It kind of depends on the brand. So just make sure you press it for a good 10 minutes or so. What I usually do at home is I just put it between 2 plates and then put something heavy like a cast iron skillet on top of it. Okay, so these pans are green pans. They're non-stick with kind of safer coating, but they are not supposed to be heated too high. So it makes it a little tricky for cooking this. And they're brand new, so I don't want to ruin them. So I'm going to err on the side of caution and just keep the heat kind of low. But it might just take a little bit longer. Oops. My hands are clean, but I'm going to put on gloves because it's a little messy. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. And let's see, what was I saying? So I pressed it between two plates, drained off the water, and then, you know, it comes in a block. So I like to cut it. If this is the block, I kind of cut it in half this way and then cut it into 5 pieces to get 10. And I find that that shape works well for cooking in a pan about this size, or for actually putting in spring rolls. And I marinated in a little food storage container like this, that's kind of just big enough to fit the tofu. Because then you don't need to make a ton of marinade to cover it. And the amount of marinade in there doesn't quite cover the tofu, so I'll just flip it a couple of times. Like turn the entire container upside down, and then it'll kind of coat the top layer, and then it'll kind of seep back through, and then turn it back over. And that works pretty well without having to use a ton of ingredients to make the marinade. Okay, so we're gonna cook this kind of slowly. I would say at home, if you have a pan that can tolerate higher heat, maybe like a cast iron pan that is good and seasoned, that it won't stick to, you'll get a really nice sear on that, because it is nice for the texture. But if you're making it ahead, you know, it's naturally going to lose some of that sear. So just know that it's not going to be super crisp if you make it ahead and eat it later. All right, so we're going to let that cook kind of slowly. But I want to do this first because it's going to take a while. I should also mention this burner is probably not as powerful as your home stove. So when we cook in here, things tend to take a little bit longer. So just keep that in mind. It'll go a little bit faster at home. Okay, let's see. If you're making it at home, the next step would be to cook the vermicelli noodles according to the package instructions. Some noodles are a bit thinner and you don't even really need to boil them. You just pour hot water over them and let them sit for a few minutes. These ones, if you can see on the screen, are a little bit thicker, and they take 8 minutes to cook, which is still pretty quick. So I just boiled them for 8 minutes and turned it off, drained it, and then rinsed the noodles with cold water to stop the cooking and to cool them down. And then they've just kind of been in the fridge. So that is already done. And we can hear the pan is sizzling a bit. So we don't want to flip it too much because we want to get the a little bit of crust on all the sides of the tofu. So I'm just going to put it on medium heat, and then we'll just turn it so that it cooks on each of the 4 sides and gets a nice golden brown crust. All right, so we can throw together everything else. And this is a salad recipe, and that basically means that you don't have to follow the recipe exactly. You can omit things that you don't like. You can add in other things you like. You can change the proportions. It doesn't really matter too much. So this is 8 ounces of vermicelli noodles. The package here I bought it in is a 1 pound. So 16 ounces in a pound. So I just used half of the bag, and it came in about 3 sort of blocks. So I took out one and then just kind of cracked the other one in half to divide it in half. But if this is kind of too much for you, you can just use one of the blocks, or if you want more, you know, and so on. All right, so we have some more vegetables here. So we're going to use lettuce as the base. This is just green leaf lettuce. You could also use romaine or red leaf or butter lettuce or whatever texture preference you have, but I think the green leaf lettuce works pretty well. We also have some fresh mint, which I know not everybody loves in savory dishes, so if you don't like the mint, you can just leave it out. And we have some chives, or you can use green onions. Sometimes green onions are a little bit easier to find. And then cucumber. And this is a hothouse cucumber, which means that the skin is pretty thin and tender, and the seeds are kind of small and not too bitter. So you can eat the whole thing. Whereas the other cucumbers that are kind of the most standard at the grocery store, they're probably about this size when they're whole, maybe a little thicker, darker green, kind of thicker, waxier skin. That skin's kind of thick. If you have one of those, you might want to peel the whole thing or peel it so that there's kind of like stripes. And then you can eat the whole thing, but yeah, it's a little tough, a little bitter. So I would scoop out the seeds for one of those cucumbers. But I like these kind because you can eat the whole thing. All right, so our tofu is sizzling here. And I can look at it sideways, which you probably can't quite see, but I can see it's starting to brown on the bottom there. So what I usually do is just kind of press it on the side to turn it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You might need a little assistance from a spoon. If you have tongs, you could use those. Oops. Okay, yeah, so just kind of push on the side. So I can see it's starting to brown on the side there. So it is a little easier with tongs, but the only tongs that I have are metal, and generally don't want to use metal on nonstick. So if you have tongs at home that are like silicone on the tip or something, those are a little safer on a nonstick pan. Or if you're using cast iron, then the metal should be fine. So these are only a little bit browned. I'm probably not going to get the tofu super dark in here because this pan isn't, or this burner is not very powerful, and we have some other things to cook on the stove. And I also just don't want to create too much steam and smoke in here because this is not an actual kitchen. So we gotta be a little careful and open the door and whatnot. All right. Yeah.
I didn't know if I could talk.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
But what about a Persian cucumber, the smaller ones? Are those good or you have to eat those?
Persian cucumbers are smaller. They kind of look like a smaller version of this, and they're tender too, and you can eat the whole thing. So you could substitute a Persian cucumber here. Yeah, there's actually like pretty much with all vegetables and fruit, there's so many other types that we don't really have at the grocery store, right? So there are a lot of other types that will work. But if you're not sure, maybe look it up and see what types you have. There's like pickling cucumbers, and there's like long curly ones and yellow ones. And that's the fun of doing things like going to the farmer's market or trying growing your own. You can grow all types of interesting, unique fruits and vegetables. Okay, so I have one head of lettuce. This one's a little small. It actually came in a pack of 2, but just to keep it simple, I'm going to just use the one head. And you could tear it up, but I'm just gonna kind of chop it up loosely. Just be quick. And I remember hearing a long time ago that if you cut your lettuce, that it will brown faster. But as far as I know, that's been tested and debunked. So if it's easier to just cut up your lettuce, then that's not a problem. Okay. And we're gonna turn the tofu every couple of minutes. So you can see maybe there that these ones, they're on the 3rd side. So the one that's facing up is starting to show the browning. I would definitely brown it more if I was cooking this at home and not worried about all the other things that I was just talking about. But we'll see if we can just keep rotating and get nice and brown. Okay. So next we'll cut up the cucumber, and it's a spring vegetable class. Cucumbers kind of come into peak season, maybe like May, so really late spring. So sometimes I show you recipes where things aren't quite in season yet, because I figure you might need a couple of weeks to buy the groceries or to even think about making them. So we're getting a little bit of a head start on the late spring recipes with this recipe, whereas the next one we're going to do is more early spring. We're kind of in early spring right now, right? So cucumber, has a lot of water, so it's not like the most nutrient packed vegetable ever. I mean, technically it's a fruit, it has seeds, but it still has some nutrients like vitamin C, magnesium, and potassium, and vitamin K. And it's tasty and crunchy and hydrating, so still a good food to eat. And since this recipe is deconstructed spring rolls, you know, you can really cut these things however you want, but in a spring roll, the cucumber would probably be in little strips, so I kind of like to cut it similar to that. So you could just cut it in half. And I cut it into about like 2-inch pieces just to make it kind of bite-sized and manageable. And I'm going to cut it into thin little strips. Like that. Or, you know, if this piece feels a little bit too big, you could cut out a little bit of the middle so that you're left, you have this kind of seed part, and you could, you know, just eat it or compost it. And then just cut up the rest so that the pieces are a little bit smaller. Yeah, whatever your preference is. So that's kind of the difference in cutting it. So if you don't really care, then you can cut it however you want. You can cut it, if it's easier to cut it into rounds or half moons, you can do that too. Again, it's a salad, it doesn't really matter. So we need 2 cups of cucumber, which for these big hothouse cucumbers is probably gonna be about half of a big one. Takes a little while to chop it all. Let's check on the tofu. Yeah, once it gets a little bit of a crust on it, it's a little easier to turn just by pushing on it. The first time you do it, it's a little tough. And sometimes if they're real squishy, they won't go. You might come back around and have some assistance from a spoon. Oops. Go that way. Okay. Cucumber. And well, maybe I'll try to do this since I'm not serving these as samples. If I were serving the whole salad at once for like my family or something, I might kind of separate the components so you can see and then toss it all together at the end. So I'll do that just for a demonstration. It'll be a little messy because I didn't think of that until just now. All right. Done cucumber. Okay, and then we can go ahead and throw in the vermicelli noodles. So you might not need all of it. And they're a little sticky and messy, so you might even kind of pull them apart a little bit just so you can throw the salad together a little bit more easily. And if you cook the whole 8 ounces and it feels like too much, then just save the rest for something else. Make like another cold salad with it. And then for the herbs, we have mint. Say 1/4 cup of mint leaves. So we don't really want the stems here, so I'm just gonna tear off the leaves. And we actually grow mint in our staff garden. Has anybody been to the staff garden? Does anybody know we have a staff garden? No, I know, right? So it's located next to Mulford Hall by Morgan and Lee Cushing and Browns. And there's a little strip that we maintain, and we have some herbs and native plants and all kinds of flowers and a couple of trees. And there's a little bit of mint there. So if you ever just need a little bit of mint for this recipe, you can stop by. Mint pretty much grows like a weed, so don't feel bad taking a little bit. It'll be back the next week. Okay, so about 1/4 cup. I'm gonna keep plucking some of these leaves off. And So what we do with the staff garden is we go out there once a month, usually the fourth Thursday of the month at lunchtime. And I'm just gonna tear up the mint leaves here. Sprinkle them on the side. And we just maintain the garden, which usually means weeding and pruning and sometimes a little harvesting. And it's fun and relaxing. And it's a nice break in the workday just to be outside and kind of be around nature and chat with people. So I encourage you to come, check it out if you haven't been yet.
And it's, there's a sign there, do you know how to find it, or?
There's not really a sign for the garden, but there's signs for some of the plants that explain what they are. And then at the very bottom, it says staff garden, so. But we do have a map on our website, so if you can't find it, you can check that out. All right, and then for chives, I think it just says four chives sliced, so feel free to do more chives if you want more. I mean, let's just use these up, right? I think that'll be okay. I'm gonna kind of just fold them in half to make them a little easier, a little quicker to slice. And try to keep my head out of the way of the camera. I'm gonna quickly slice them up. So I want you all to know that we appreciate your evaluations for our classes and listen to your advice. So I now have a compost bowl, which I think somebody suggested, which is something I've been meaning to do, but keeps the workspace a little neater. It's a good idea to do at home too, just throw everything in your bowl, and then if you have compost at home, throw it in the bin later. And there was something else from one of the evaluations. I think I was told my head gets in the way sometimes, so I'm trying to be conscious of that, but there's always so much I can do. All right. Who wants to see the top of my head, I guess? Okay, so that tofu, you know, I would probably like it to be a little crisper, but just for the sake of time, I'm gonna go ahead and stop it. And see, we need to make room here, so I'm just gonna toss some of it right on top of the noodles. Oops, a little slippery. Just to get it out of the way. You could dice it up if you want. But yeah, if you want to do something similar to this recipe, but actually make the spring rolls, then these are most of the steps. You would just also heat up the a little bit of water, dip the rice paper in it, and then kind of roll everything up. All right. Make the dressing. And oh, I think for the sake of time, I'm going to show you the dressing that we already have, because basically it's just peanut butter, hoisin, and a little bit of sriracha. I went pretty light on the sriracha for the samples in case anybody doesn't like too spicy. So if it wasn't spicy enough for you, feel free to add more. And I just whisked it all up. So if we have time at the end, I'll show you how we do that and how it kind of changes consistency. It's kind of cool, but I want to make sure we have time for everything else. And for the dressing, I think the one important thing is just to pay attention to the consistency and add more water as needed, because it will depend on the type of peanut butter you use, the type of hoisin. This one is quite liquidy and some others are thicker. So, you know, I can't tell you the exact amount of water, but what I would say is you want it to be pourable. So you don't want to paste. If you were making actual spring rolls, you probably want it thicker because it's like a dipping sauce, but for the dressing, you want it a bit thinner. And just keep in mind that when you make a sauce at room temperature and then you refrigerate it like a dressing, it's going to get thicker in the fridge. So you might make it a little bit runnier for a dressing than you would normally want, because when you refrigerate it, it'll thicken. Okay, so there is the salad. Let's do this really quick. We do add some crushed peanuts on top for a little crunch. So I just bought some roasted unsalted peanuts. And as always, I like to buy things in the bulk department when possible, especially for these cooking classes, because usually I'm just making a small amount and I'm not cooking with these ingredients every day like I am at home. So I can buy just the amount that I need and use less packaging, and it saves money and reduces waste. I'll sprinkle those on top. So for example, these peanuts, organic roasted, no salt. I didn't quite fill up this jar, but it was $1.10. So pretty good deal. Right, so we will just set that aside for now. Okay. Let's see. Real quick, just a few other things about the salad. Sometimes I like to add the pickled daikon radish and carrots, which is like a Vietnamese topping. That's pretty easy to make, where you just shred both of the root vegetables and heat up some water and vinegar. I think usually rice vinegar with some sugar and salt, and just pour it over, and it will kind of pickle over time. And it's kind of sour and crunchy, and the daikon radish is a little bit funky, and it just adds like a huge pop of flavor to this. So you can add some of that if you want. I also want to talk about, since it's seasonal vegetables, we also have lettuce, chives, and mint in here, which are more of like spring, early mid-spring vegetables. And if you are making this as a make ahead type of salad, then you could probably put everything together except for the peanuts and the dressing, and then just add those at the end. All right, so let's do our next recipe, which is the creamy white beans with peas and asparagus. And it's kind of a quick 20-minute meal that you can throw together after work, mostly using recipes that have ingredients that have a long shelf life. So the only thing that you'd probably need to buy fresh or last minute would be the asparagus, but a lot of the other ingredients will keep for a while. So what we're gonna do is cook the vegetables in the pan and then set them aside. And then we'll cook the beans in the same pan. And a stainless steel pan works pretty well for this. Doesn't necessarily need to be nonstick. So this is kind of a small portion recipe. It serves two, so you could easily double or triple this recipe. But it calls for half a pound of asparagus. So asparagus to me symbolizes spring. It's one of the first vegetables to come up, and it's most tender in early spring. And you might find even in the same bunch some that are thinner, some that are thicker, and it's really whatever your preference is. The thicker ones are good for like grilling or roasting. The thinner ones are maybe a little bit better for salads or sautéing. And so what I'm gonna do is, the ends are kind of woody, so I just snap it by hand, and then they kind of naturally break where the asparagus is more tender. You can usually do 4 or 5 at a time. And I like this recipe because it's hearty, it's filling, it's creamy, it's savory, and you can dip some crusty bread in it, which is like one of my favorite types of ways to eat. So, and it's also, it's filling because it has a lot of fiber in it from the vegetables and the beans, and it has protein and a lot of nutrients. And it's kind of simple enough that it lets the flavor of these spring vegetables shine. You can actually like taste the sweetness a little bit. Okay, so we're gonna heat up our pan. And we're gonna add, I'm just gonna eyeball it, half a tablespoon of olive oil. These vegetables don't really stick or anything. And then I have some peas that were frozen. Green peas are also a spring vegetable, but they're, what is it? I think the shelf life is pretty short when you buy them fresh, and then you have to, take all the peas out of the pods yourself. So you can definitely do that if you want. It'll be delicious, but frozen peas are great, and most frozen vegetables are kind of picked during their peak season anyway, and they're really affordable. So, do whichever your preference is. I should also mention they're not technically a vegetable, they're a legume, they're a pea. So they're kind of more closely related to beans, which means that they have a bit more protein than a lot of other vegetables. And they have some starch and lots of fiber, so they're very filling. They also have vitamin C, K, A, and folate. So that's just good for a lot of reasons. Good for your heart, your eyes, your brain, your bone health, and may protect against cancer, some types of cancer, diabetes, and blood disorders. So, we don't think of peas as being a super healthy food, but, most plant foods have some benefits in there. And I know a lot of people maybe grew up eating peas, and this is a food that's like notoriously pushed to the side of the plate that you avoid. But hopefully you can, if that was you as a child, hopefully you can find a way to reconnect with peas, make peace with peas, and enjoy their sweet flavor again. Okay, so this again takes a little while to heat up. We'll just get everything else ready. Let's see, what else do I want to say? How about health benefits of asparagus? So peas and asparagus are kind of like a nice spring combination. Both vegetables or, vegetable and legume pair well with other spring vegetables like garlic or new potatoes. Asparagus is an excellent source of vitamin K, which is good for blood clotting and your bones, and it has chromium, which is good for your blood sugar. Similar to everything else, also has fiber, folate, vitamin C. And the vitamin C from the asparagus and the peas helps you absorb the iron from the white beans. So we think of meat and fish and some like shellfish as being really good sources of iron. And the iron in animals is a little bit easier to absorb. But there's also a lot of plant foods with iron that the iron isn't absorbed quite as well. It's called non-heme iron. But pairing it with vitamin C helps you absorb it, which really isn't hard to do. Like most fruits and vegetables have some vitamin C. It's not really hard to get enough vitamin C as long as you eat a variety of fruits and veggies. So we're gonna let this cook for just a couple of minutes because it takes a little bit longer to cook than the peas. When I make this at home, I just throw the peas in from frozen. It totally works fine. These ones I bought yesterday, and then they were in the fridge overnight, so they're pretty much thawed. So this will cook really quickly. All right, what else about asparagus? I guess I already cut it up, but what do you want to look for? Plump, straight stems. You don't want anything that's like kind of too wilted, or split or woody. And a tip that I learned for storing it is if you wrap it in a damp towel and put it in a bag, like a sealable bag, it could last for up to 2 weeks. So that's kind of the recommended way to store it. Ideally a reusable bag, like a silicone resealable bag. Do you have any of those? Okay, and again, the proportions here are kind of whatever you like, so you don't have to measure it exactly. It calls for, what is it? I think half a cup of peas, but you could do more or less. You could throw in, other spring vegetables if you like. Does anybody have any other favorite spring vegetables? What is it? Oh, sorry, I can't hear the specifically. Oh, sorrel, okay. Yeah, so if you're from other parts of the world, you might have had access to other ingredients or different things are on season at different times, but I'm pretty sure you can kind of get anything you want here, right? So, sorrel, I haven't cooked with that yet. I'll have to try that.
That's the yellow flower that's in everyone's yard.
What's that?
The yellow flower in our. But is that flower that you get? Flower, it's just like the banana. Oh. Yeah.
So, there are so many different vegetables out there. Sometimes it's fun to pick something you've never heard of or never cooked with before. And whatever we can do to make vegetables more exciting and appealing. Okay, so I think everything's pretty well heated through, so I'm just gonna set this aside in a bowl. Yeah, when I think spring vegetables, I think green, some leafy greens, arugula, and also some root vegetables like radishes and turnips. Those tend to be spring veggies. Oops, okay.
Last night I had a really good arugula, beet, blood orange, salad with, like fresh pistachio and goat cheese.
Ooh, okay, if you're on Zoom, you didn't hear it. Arugula, beet, blood orange, and crushed pistachio and goat cheese.
Yeah.
A salad. That sounds really good. I just got some blood oranges yesterday. I love Berkeley Bowl. I think they were like 70 cents a pound or something. So yeah, so that's one of the benefits of what we're talking about in this class, eating in season. It's kind of coming to the end of citrus season. Things will be cheaper when they're in season. They're more abundant and they tend to be fresher and more local and taste better. And a lot of times the flavors of like the seasonal vegetable, the spring vegetables really go well together. The summer vegetables go well together. The winter vegetables go well together. Okay. So I'm going to add the rest of the olive oil, which I think is 1.5 tablespoons. And we're going to start on the bean part of the dish. So we need some shallots, which tastes kind of something like a combination of onion and garlic. And the recipe calls for 3 medium shallots. I would say these are maybe like medium to large shallots. So we probably only need, I had an extra one from earlier, probably this one plus one more should be plenty.
We can have shallots in each section of shallot, or is the whole bowl of shallot?
I don't know. Yeah, because these kind of came like, wait a second. 2 of these kind of came together, right? I would probably say each one is a shallot. And when I looked it up, it said 1 medium shallot is usually about a 1/4 cup. So I added that to the recipe, that we need about 3/4 cup. But these were the smallest shallots I could find, and they're pretty large. But if you do a little too much shallot, it's okay. It's not going to hurt anybody. And if you don't have shallots, you could definitely just use onion and or garlic. Doesn't really matter too much. Oops. It's hard to peel shallots with gloves on. Okay. There's a little piece left. Shave it off. Okay. So for shallots, usually they're cut not in too big of pieces. So if you have kind of a thick shallot, you can slice it a little bit horizontally. Maybe you can't see. And then I'm going to cut lengthwise into it. Kind of like how you would cut an onion. Then just dice it up. So these ones here are pretty thick. So I'm going to cut it that way. And cut it lengthwise. Looks like about half a cup. This will make 3/4 cup. Okay, that's probably about 3/4 of a cup. Throw it into our olive oil. And then we're just gonna cook this until it starts to turn translucent and browns a little bit, kind of just like how you would cook onions. The sulfur fumes just hit me in the eyeball. Whew. Okay. And then once they brown a little bit, we're gonna add the beans. So the recipe calls for cannellini beans. This recipe is from a website called Recipes and Places, which I think is kind of a cool site. She shows a lot of recipes from around the world that are just naturally plant-based. I don't think this one is from anywhere in particular. I think it's just one she made up, but I like it 'cause it's simple and easy. So I'm using Great Northern beans, which I think are a little bit smaller than cannellini, but really similar flavor. So you can kind of use whichever you can find or whichever you prefer. But I really love pretty much all types of white beans. I think they're tender, the flavor is mild, they're so versatile. You can eat them cold. You can make stews with them, you can mash them up. If you're brave, you can make desserts with them because they have such a neutral flavor. There are some desserts where you can actually like puree the beans and I mean, we have some on our website. I think there's one, I'll tell you, it might sound funny. It's called cookie dough dip. So it's sort of like, if you think about it, it's sort of like a sweet hummus. So, you know, you puree the beans or the chickpeas, and then if you add vanilla extract, it really covers up any little bit of bean flavor. And so then you add like a little bit of sugar and whatever else, some little mini chocolate chips, and you can eat it like dip. Whereas, you know, cookie dough is not really safe to eat, not only because of the eggs, but sometimes flour is contaminated. So flour is not really meant to be eaten raw. But this is meant to be eaten raw. So you can eat it with like some, sometimes I just eat it with apple slices or graham crackers. Fun little treat. Okay.
There is a while in the store, I saw a lot of like sweet hummuses being promoted, and then I stopped seeing them. I don't know if they-
Yeah, sweet hummus had a moment and it didn't last very long. I did see like chocolate hummus, right? Yeah, has anybody tried any of those sweet hummuses? Maybe oh, 5 minutes, thank you. Yeah, maybe, you know, people just weren't ready for that yet. Okay. That's starting to brown a little bit. I'm gonna just, we're running out of time. I'm gonna throw in the beans, already rinsed and drained them. The original recipe says to leave some of the liquids, but I usually just like to rinse it all away. And then start fresh with just water. And put some water in, you know, early enough that it can kind of like thicken the stew a bit. Because you know, beans have some sugars that are kind of hard to digest, and I think there's a lot of that in the liquid, so I'd rather just kind of wash that away. But you know, there are recipes that call for the liquid, and that's fine too. Okay, so we're gonna add some nutritional yeast, 2 tablespoons, which kind of gives it a cheesy flavor. And if you don't use it at Berkeley Bowl, they also have this in bulk. I didn't quite fill it up, but I've seen this container being sold for like $6, and I filled it up most of the way for $1.60. So, you know, you can save a little bit of money that way. And then we're gonna add some water. It calls for just, I think, a 1/4 cup, which I think I ended up using closer to a cup when I was cooking this earlier. Just to make it nice and thick. So just add water until you reach the consistency that you desire. And then you can just use water, but if you want a little more flavor, you can use broth instead. And if you don't want to open up a whole carton of broth, you can use the bouillon paste. And you can see it on the screen. This one is vegetable broth. And it will give it a little more flavor. And I love this stuff because it's cheaper and easier than buying cartons of broth. I personally like the no chicken one. So there's vegetable broth, or vegetable based, and then this one is still vegetarian, but it's called no chicken. I don't know, I just think it has such a better flavor than the vegetable one, but that's my personal preference, so use what you like. And then what I would do at the end is just stir in a little bit of miso, which you can also skip if you don't have it. I'm just gonna scoop it out with this. We need about a teaspoon, which is gonna just give it a bit more flavor. And it's a fermented form of soy and has some probiotics, but you can't really, if you heat up probiotics too, then, you know, it's a bacteria that you're gonna kill it. So you might stir it in at the end, but just for the sake of time, I'm just gonna stir it in. And then what I do to thicken it up is I mash up about 1/3 of the beans. And that will just create a creamier texture because it kind of releases some of the starch and thickens up the liquid. So I love the creamy texture, so I don't know if you can tell the difference. And then as it cooks, it's gonna thicken a bit. Okay, so we just have a couple minutes left. Let me make sure there wasn't anything else I wanted to add. Yeah, I think that was it. And then I would just serve this by putting the beans on a plate. So this needs to cook a little bit longer because it's still kind of liquidy to thicken up a bit. And you can season it to taste with salt and pepper. You can garnish it with sesame seeds if you want. So I would put the beans on the plate, top it with the vegetables that we cooked earlier, and then garnish with sesame seeds, and that's your meal. And then you can dip some bread in it. You know, you could easily double this recipe and bring the leftovers for lunch the next day. It reheats pretty well. All right, so that's all we have for today's class. We are going to do raffle.